So, we're ready for questions. Anybody want to ask a question? I think I've got one, Bob. You mentioned the word disconnect, and come on up. You mentioned the word disconnect, and I wonder if you could elaborate on that a little bit.
I think it all comes to when we discuss the idea of the identity of who we are. And if we haven't really had a proper formation for our children of what their identity is and how it is relevant within the community of faith that they belong to, as their life experience is so diverse from their actual faith experience within that community of faith, the community of faith possesses a lack of relevance to just the things that they believe in. They become much more acculturated and much more familiar with other churches within the American context than our own church. The great disconnect is them ending up going to the Congregational church, while the great disconnect is them actually going to no church at all. That seems to be the greatest dilemma that I think we face at this point in time. We expect certain things from our children, and they are educated in a very specific manner. And then we take them within this subcultural environment, and the things that we're exposing them to from Monday to Saturday are very different than the things they're being exposed to on Sunday. And this type of dual persona, and almost a healthy form of like schizophrenia, how long can that continue until they actually will say, I feel much more of an affinity to another community of faith? That's what I mean by the big disconnect.
Okay, this ties actually in really well with the question that I was going to ask, which was, you mentioned inclusivity in your talk, and at first I really took offense to that word because of those concerns that you iterated. So my question is, do you have any suggestions for how we can focus on the Orthodox aspects of our culture as opposed to merely the ethnic aspects in such a way that we promote unity within and between our Orthodox churches, that we're, that we unite, and that we concentrate and focus on those things that are most important and most relevant, while at the same time we're not being inclusive in a way that indiscriminately takes in whatever is here, whatever's at hand, whatever's available, whatever we see in the other, Protestant churches, the Catholic churches, etc.
A very pertinent question. The idea, when I'm speaking about inclusive, means within the organization itself, the operative structure is one that is always finding mutual acceptance for people coming into the community. I think one of the problems that we have today, challenges, is our ability to build social capital within communities. Our communities become very stagnant, unfortunately, with social circles cutting people out, people who are infrequent visitors do not feel welcome, people who are visitors themselves the first time, they're not feeling the same level of acceptance there. Your concept of inclusivity, I'm a conservative Orthodox clergyman. I have to tell you that I'm not interested in incorporating any other type of religious philosophies from any other denomination. What I'm interested in is a process by which we enhance the Orthodox cultures within our community through a process of education. And also, we expose our communities to the ethnicity of other groups. We build social capital with, how many people here, let me just do this, it's going to be very interesting. How many people know parishioners from a Serbian parish? How many from an Antiochian parish? How many from a OCA parish? Romanian? How many have a constant sort of, how many communities actually have a dialogue with these other churches? That seems to be the difficulty now, is building that network that's going to make it possible for someone who lives, let's just say you live in Cicero, I hope I don't screw up with my geography here, and you're driving past 3 or 4 Orthodox churches to go to a place in Evanston. Why would you be doing that one actually right there in Cicero. That is where we want to end up going. I mean, my home parish in Boston, we have people who drive an hour and a half to go to church because it is St. John of Damascus. That's where they want to go to church. That's where their parents went to church. This concept is something that has a real aspect of the village and has an aspect of a very inclusive sort of subculture. Our children may not be able to put that kind of energy and time into maintaining that. We have to become a lot more user-friendly.
Good. Yeah.
George? I think that's my job.
I don't know how I'm going to make this a question, but in the recent 2 or 3 years, I've been hearing, and I just heard last week in where I live, the bishop and the clergy, they tend to be demonizing America and American culture, and there's this big contrast between us Orthodox who live in the West, are Western, and we don't really understand the faith of the East, and we're not somehow Orthodox enough. And I see the clergyman who spoke here before said that he was once, his church once had 700 parishioners, and now his church has dwindled and it's not that big. And I see in St. Louis they want to move out of the inner city, and I see there's all these problems in New York City where St. Spiridon wants to move out of wherever they are. And my question, my observation is that the Greek Orthodox Church does not want to minister to the 99 million Americans who are unchurched or the people around their parishes, and we've created this great dichotomy where we need to create this mission to where we are. We have a community at St. Catherine's where I am that's been there for 35, 40 years, and we have very few converts. We're not interested in the neighborhood. I don't think that it's fair to be demonizing the country when the church won't minister to the people in the church. And how do we do that? It relates to this cultural thing.
I think, again, it goes back to something that Helen Cretikos Theodosopoulos said at one time in class, back 20 years ago, Helen, when she said the basis of Orthodox theology is a social gospel. First time I ever heard the term, Helen, and I've held on to it ever since. You actually did. And the situation is that our social gospel is not very well developed in America at all. I think that we're very comfortable. We've spent, and I'm going to talk about this in my keynote today, we've spent a tremendous amount of time making it in America in terms of the externality of our life. And now it's time to turn around. We're there big time. And it's time to turn around and start developing the internality, the interiority of our life. We go to St. John of Damascus again, we use. And the parish has the best pantocrator, the best platitera. It's a beautiful worship experience, yet we have not welcomed anybody in there who lives in that town at all. People that come that do not feel welcomed at all. In terms of our ministry, we're sending money to the St. George's Hospital in Beirut, Maklua, Sayednaya. We're sending money to St. Gregory's Orphanage in Damascus. Yet we're not spending 5 cents or 5 minutes of our time with the people in Dedham, Massachusetts. This is a very great era. I mean, this is where we live. This is our home. I love our brothers and sisters overseas. I love the things that our grandparents brought to us. Our children need to have a respect for that, but yet we need to be forward-facing to understand, unless we embrace the mainstream culture and make it our own, as that young lady back there said.
Myself was first generation. Obviously, my father had a different concept. My children have a different concept of unity. To them, they do not see any separation of people, right? They've gone to college. I mean, to them, a Negro, a white, a Spanish, a Jewish person, they've gotten along with it. There's no problem with them as far as uniting. And where is the future of our church? Is it with us, the older people, or is it with the young people? And I think in this approach of trying to build this unity, this league, I think we have to have people there who kind of look forward and say, what are we building? Are we building it for people who would have another lifespan of maybe 5, 10, 15 years? Or are we thinking about the future? I know it's going to be a step-by-step process, but I'm wondering, has that been thought through? Where are we? What's the basis for moving forward? Does that make sense?
I think you're talking about the difference between short-term management and long-term vision. And I think you bring a very interesting point. At the present time, we seem to be managing our church in a week-to-week or month-to-month or maybe even year-to-year, if you're really stretching a type of operation. We seem to have no vehicle that is saying, let's look down the road 10 years. When the World War II generation may mostly be gone, God willing, you'll live another 20 years. I mean, but it's very important. That generation is the greatest capital resource within the church at the present time. They are doing all the volunteer work. They're keeping it together. When they're gone, who is going to be replacing them? No one seems to be. That's the big disconnect. The big disconnect is when we have no one who is going to come forward and take the place and carry the cross. We need to be looking at who is going to be administering these churches and who is going to have the values. The greatest crisis that will exist within the Greek Archdiocese is the shortage of clergymen in the next 10 years. I mean, when I graduated from seminary, I think we graduated about 60 people maybe out of the seminary in class. They graduated 18 last year. I mean, and we have so many clergy that are past retirement still working. How long are we going to work these gentlemen? Forever? This is a big problem we need to be looking at today.
I'd like to ask a question. I want to be here a minute, Anthony. Anybody been to, how many people here have ever heard of the Missions and Evangelism Conference of the Antiochian Archdiocese? Anybody? How many have been to it? It happens annually, and it started in 1991. Has anybody here ever been to one? Because I've been to many, and I can't say as I've seen all of your faces, but I do want to make a comment. The reason I brought this up, it relates to the Antiochian Archdiocese, and as you know, in 1988, when they brought in 17 former Protestant churches into Orthodoxy, Father Peter Gilquist brought that group in, and he formulated the M&E group, and they have met annually, and we get about 150. The last session we had was last year. 150 people showed up. That's not a lot. But let me just tell you about what's happening in America in case you don't know it, because the Holy Spirit's ahead of you. And he is ahead of you, but you're trying to catch up, and that's marvelous, and that's what we like to see. But those of us who are at the grassroots level and are working at parish level with young people and older people and the like, see really very bright things happening. That group has been working with people all over the United States that want to be blessed with the Orthodox Church, have now started some 55 parishes in places like Shreveport, Louisiana, a little burg in Arkansas, I can't remember the name of that one, down in Florida, a number of parishes, in Massachusetts, also out on the Cape, just to name a few, and just to tell you that there are things happening in America on a very positive level, and that Orthodoxy is being looked at by our people in America, and people are attracted to Orthodoxy in a certain sense, but they aren't attracted to Orthodoxy on its ethnic roots. I can assure you of that.
It's in spite of us that they're attracted.
In spite of you, they are attracted. I was just at the conference a very small conference in Florida that has to do with our missions work worldwide. Okay, that's the other organization, as you know, that SCOBA represents. It represents charities, and then it represents missions worldwide. And our hope is that missions in the United States will be the third group. In fact, that's Father Peter's hope, too. But anyway, this dude, from being a Quaker for 20 years. Now, I have never heard of that.
Been attempted in the Catholic Church.
There's
ago movement to OCL in the Catholic Church called Call to Action. And it had about maybe something like 25,000 members. But it had a whole host of issues like ordination of women and gay lesbian groups and stuff like that. But there is a counterpart to it. We're not that radical.
And this is not to pick on the Roman Catholics, but I think it's a point that needs to be made because it's germane to the way we think. If you're going to talk about something in the Roman Catholic Church, that is a good example of a contrast for us to keep in mind, because there you're dealing with an entirely different theological doctrine. If you are not personally in communion with the Bishop of Rome, you're not a Roman Catholic. That's not our principle, you see. My being an Orthodox Christian is not entirely dependent on my being in communion with
something at all. You are either with the Pope or you're not. And there is no, so you can't, there can't be a comparable movement, because the concept within the Roman Catholic Church is that all Roman Catholics, all bishops, all archbishops are all under the Pope and the Curia. And so it's a structure, what I say is like, it's the difference between top down and bottom up. Our view is from the bottom up, theirs is from the top down. And it exhibits itself in interesting ways. Archbishop George, just as an example, the cardinal, holds title to all the property of all the parishes and all of the other communities in the Roman Catholic Archdiocese. So he can go and say, I close this parish because I don't think it's needed anymore. Or I close that parish because I don't think it's needed anymore. Of course, you couldn't do that with us.
Well, let's put it this way. I used to sail. When I go out on a sailing boat, I figured it was going to be a nice day. But you always worry about the squalls, the rain, so you get safety gear aboard, and you have a radio if needed. I would ask George Pontikes, supposing the courts ruled against us on this idea, what would we do then? And I ask this not as a defeatist attitude, but to go into something with your eyes open as to what the possible pitfalls are, so you can make repairs for them.
This anticipates that there would be a lawsuit filed by someone.
We seem to be going in that...
Well, let me say, I'll respond specifically, but let me make a couple of points. First of all, I think we should strenuously seek to avoid lawsuits. I cannot tell you that would be self-destructive. You know, we here in the Chicago area have had our share since the beginning of this century. You know, when the Laconians and they had the Laconians and when the Arcadians and the Laconians, here my father comes from Arcadia. The Laconians and the Arcadians, you're right. Laconians and the Arcadians got into it because the Laconians first established Ayatriada, and then when the Arcadians, was the Arcadians first? Was the first? In any event, one seeked to levy a tax on the other to come to church. That's right. And the point being that they ended up in court with a big battle. We just have to avoid that. I mean, Archbishop Iakovos could not set foot in certain of our parishes because of court orders and the former Archbishop. So we just, this is not the mind of the church. We just have to, and that's, I want to say that only because I don't want to emphasize it, but I will respond specifically. If, in fact, we lose, we have the ability to make it very, very difficult if you want to practice what we lawyers call guerrilla legal warfare. They've got to file 500 lawsuits, and they've got to deal individually, one by one. And that's going to be very difficult. And if the funds are cut off, since lawyers don't work unless you pay them, that is not going to be possible. There are ways of dealing with it, practically speaking. But as I said, and only half in jest during my talk, my view is if the Archbishop wants to take over Saints Peter and Paul and pay its mortgage, I'm half for it.
I'll take broader to answer that question. The only way that that's going to happen, George, is for the parishes to stand behind the priest and say, you say no, and we'll stand behind you. We'll pay your salary. We'll see to you that you will be excommunicated. That is the only way. And 2 years ago, when we had a forum, I tried to get the idea across to the parishes that they have the power in this country